Hey y'all. Um, I'm a little worn out right now. But before I hit the hay, I wanted to talk about something that I read that I've read over the course of the last couple of days. I've been on this kind of binge lately, reading wise, and discovered that audiobooks really agree with me. Number one, because my job requires me to spend a lot of time driving, and so there's a lot of time when I'm behind the wheel, and audiobooks just are perfect for me in that circumstance. Let me explain further. Just to I don't know why I feel the need to elaborate on this, but I do. When I have time to myself, it feels like it should be work time, and my life's work is writing. So when I have time to myself, and I could either read a book or write, uh, write, which is something I try to do daily or close to daily. Um, I almost always choose writing, and as a result, books that you read in the traditional way kind of have a tendency to go by the wayside, because when I'm unwinding or winding down, I more often like watch a movie or something. But when I have more, you know, power, brain power, and energy and free time, I'm going to be writing rather than reading. But a good writer, which hopefully I am, or I strive to be anyway, also reads, and also, because there's always more that can be read. I'm fairly well read, but I'm way behind, and I'm getting a little up there, in years. I'm getting on, so the time to read a lot of things that need to be read, it's not. I'm not going to say it's running out, but in a way it is. It is running out. So I've been on this Bret Easton Ellis binge of late. I I had previously, of course, was familiar with American Psycho, and I was intrigued by Ellis just as a personality. I think he's a very interesting interview. He's got a lot to say. He's got guts. He's got gumption. He's like a somebody who isn't afraid to bend against the wind and go against the conventional wisdom. After he wrote American Psycho, for those old enough to remember, when that published in, I believe it was 1990, he was a just an outcast from you know the literary community and the critical community in general. Everyone came down on him, particularly feminist groups, and were harshly not just critical but condemning of that book. And I remember Bret Easton Ellis during this time period reading an interview with him. I think it was in Rolling Stone, which at the time was still pretty much crap, but was more worth reading than it is now, because now it's just total crap. And back then, you sometimes find interesting and informative and worthwhile articles in the pages of Rolling Stone. And there was an interview with Ellis in at around the time that American Psycho came out and all the furor was going on. And he was just like, if feminists don't like my book, I'm just like, sorry guys, read something else. You don't have to read it. But he was totally unapologetic. He was totally, today. it seems like somebody an artist who's under fire either folds completely, and just bends the knee, and that's always just infuriating to see them bending the knee to the woke mob. I know that's a overused term, but you know what I'm talking about. Or if they try to stand up for themselves, it's like they try to defend themselves, or they try to say, "No, you all are just misunderstanding me," blah blah. But he was like, if you don't like it, don't read it, And he was just very openly defiant. It was very refreshing at the time. I remember that. And of course, he was somebody, one of the few members of the intelligentsia not to just get absolutely, didn't just go positively mental over Trump getting elected. He was just sort of like, well, okay, you know, I'm not. He refused. He wasn't a Trump supporter per se, but he wasn't. He refused to get on the outrage bandwagon, and for that he took some heat. So I applaud him. For just having that kind of nerve to stand up for himself. But I want to talk a little bit about the book Lunar Park, which is the one that I just recently finished. And like I said, I've been on a bit of a BEE binge. I finally read Less Than Zero, and I also read Imperial Bedrooms, which is sort of the sequel to Less Than Zero, set many, many years later, with many of the same characters. But the book that is my favorite of his so far, of everything that I've read, is this one that I'm going to talk about, Lunar Park. This book is just when I describe it as metafiction, of course that makes it seem like it's going to be a pain in the ass. It makes it seem like it's going to be pretentious, and there is this sort of, there's a limit to this postmodern, self-aware, being a writer who writes while being aware of being a writer writing. That whole thing can get very tiresome, but Ellis does it in a way that is just well, it's so many things at once. This book, it's got so many different seemingly disparate elements that all somehow cohere and come together. And the most interesting and delightful thing about this book is the way that it. Most of what Ellis writes is pretty dark and mordant, and this book is no exception. There's lots of disturbing stuff that happens over the course of the book, but it ends on such a note of beauty and grace and hopefulness, and there's such a wholesomeness, such a sincere wholesomeness to the book, and particularly the way that it ends. I mean, I talked the other day about how I hate tear jerkers. It's usually movies that are tear jerkers because that's where they really can pull the strings. Pull on your tear ducts most effectively. Is in that medium, but you can also do it in literature. And I hate being emotionally manipulated. But the way this book ends, it actually had me close to tears. But the tears were honestly come by. And it's all the more extraordinary when you think about the fact that this book really starts. You wouldn't think it would end on that kind of note, because the way that it starts, chapter one is just this wacky, crazy mock memoir. And this is where, talking about being self-referential and metafictional, comes most into play. Actually, the way that it begins, it sounds like it's just a straight memoir, and that's what I thought it was at first. For the first little bit of chapter one, maybe close to the first half of chapter one, I thought, oh, I had no idea. Really, I just went into this book, reading this book blind. I didn't really know anything about it. I didn't read the premise of it or anything like that. I just thought, oh, well, I'll give this one a shot. It's cheaper than the rest of the Bret Easton Ellis books on Audible. So let me purchase this one and then give it a shot. And for the first few minutes, it just seems like it's Bret Easton Ellis talking about his young literary life and the circumstances behind the writing of his early books, and then how that changed his lifestyle, and how he got caught up in the glamour and excess of fame and so forth. And at some point around the midpoint of chapter one, you realize that he's putting you on. This is not an actual straight memoir. There are many things in it that might be truly, from the life of the actual Bret Easton Ellis, but you eventually find out that the Bret Easton Ellis who's telling this story, is an author and did write all of the same books that the Bret Easton Ellis that we know wrote, but it goes off in a direction where that this is a very different life that is being described. So pretty brilliant start, but with that kind of start to the book, you kind of expect that it's going to go in this just sort of wacky satirical direction. But where it goes from there is really interesting. And I don't even know. I don't want this to be too long, so I'm not going to go into an enormous degree of detail. But what eventually where you eventually find the story going is that it becomes a story about fathers and sons and disaffected relationships between fathers and sons. In the book, Bret Easton Ellis is married to a woman, or gets married to a woman, and I think earlier in his life he was kind of more, ambisexual or at least bisexual. I think now he just identifies as gay, but I think earlier in his life he was with a lot of women, and in this book he's pretty much he describes himself as being sort of this degenerate who has all kinds of unseemly affairs with both men and women, and over the course of the book he's pursuing a sexual relationship with a younger female student who's writing her graduate dissertation on him, while he's married to this woman that he has this complicated past with, and it turns out he had a son with. So it's at this point it's looking very much like it's going to be this comedy of manners, set in both a college setting and also in this very upper middle class setting, maybe more than upper middle class, maybe upper class, but like a ritzy suburb where all of the parents send their kids to these exclusive schools, and they're all like hyper into like nutrition and trendy, like they want their kids to they're they're they want their kids to start training, for college to get into an exclusive Ivy League school when they're in kindergarten or first grade. Just so there's just so much like obnoxious kind of overly ambitious, snobby, wealthy parents, and it's a satire of that whole sort of community and what it does to kids. And there's that's all playing out, which is also interesting and part of the satire. Also, another thing that this book is an alternative history, even though to a large extent that's kind of in the background of what happens rather than the foreground. But the book was written, I think it was published in 2005. It was written in the a few years before that. So there's a lot of the immediate post 9/11 zeitgeist or cultural atmosphere that suffuses the book, and it's set in an alternate world where after that initial event, which was believed at the time to be by everyone to be a terrorist attack by a Muslim group, and nothing suspicious about it whatsoever. Nothing that smacks of being an inside job whatsoever. I mean, nobody thought that for a good 3 or 4 or 5 years. I think as far as as far as what I can remember of that era. And what I remember thinking at that time period was, after those attacks, it was like, oh wow, we're entering a new era now, and there's going to be, terrorism is going to be like something we read about every day. There's going to be, suicide bombers going into Starbucks and killing 15 people, pulling the pin on their suicide vest and killing a bunch of people. And this story and this book is set in that kind of alternate world where things do kind of go in that direction, and there's this fearfulness that suffuses everything, the whole culture, especially in the cities, and so that helps give the incentive for them to wind up in the suburbs. But when they're in the suburbs, of course, they're not really. They haven't really successfully escaped the fear. So much of the book is about fear, and what it does, fear and dread, and the effect that it has on one's psyche, in particular with regard to father and son relationships. The character in the book, who's named Bret Easton Ellis, and seems like our main character. It seems like our our author, Bret Easton Ellis, in a lot of ways. Nevertheless, his fame and success as an author notwithstanding, he's a struggling and in some ways kind of pitiful character. Sympathetic in spite of himself, in spite of all of his faults, and he has had this very difficult relationship with his father, who's now dead, who died at a fairly early age. But when he was alive, they never got along, and he pretty much hated his father. And now when he was just sort of fooling around with the woman that he eventually wound up in this very tumultuous marriage with, this very shaky marriage, he ended up siring a child, a son. So now he's got this son that he never wanted, like from the the time when his girlfriend, later wife, told him that she was pregnant. He said, "Get rid of it. I don't want it." And and basically, was angry with her for keeping the child, and just didn't basically, didn't have anything to do with his own son. But then has this moment of kind of seeming to reform his life, and now he's married, and now he's with his living under the same roof as his son, whom he ignored during his early years, and his son is deeply resentful of him and hates him, and he's finds himself in the same kind of position that his own father was in with regard to him, and and it becomes it's all these many things have so many things taking place in the story at once, but the core of the story is it's a ghost story, it's a horror story, it's the supernatural, both psychological and supernatural horror story. There are there are all these things going on, these horrific or scary, unexplained phenomena happening. Not just in the like in the broader society itself. Which seems to be there's more and more terrorist violence everywhere. That's again the backdrop where things went in the direction that a lot of us were thinking that they would go after 9/11. In the book, in our reality, that didn't happen. 9/11 was kind of a one-off. There, but at the time, immediately afterwards, we were. I remember thinking, nothing's going to be the same again. We're not safe anywhere, especially not in the cities. There's a lot of that kind of thinking, just suffusing the the thought waves, if you will, the general thought waves of the period. So so all that's going on in the background, but there's also this supernatural these supernatural things happening, and lots of murder and mayhem, and lots of very disturbing and gory kind of stuff. But it's a different kind of gore than it's a different kind of gore and mayhem and murder than you found in, say, American Psycho, because this again it's like almost a pulpy, Stephen King esque kind of story in some ways. There's a lot of description of these supernatural events that eventually we find out. It's a very, very complicated thing, but we find out that it involves ghosts and demons, and there is an actual demonologist who appears and who ends up playing a role in the book, who helps Bret Easton Ellis, the character, out with these supernatural phenomena that are terrorizing him and his family, and just making their lives hell. So so the book is so many things. It's got so many different elements to it. Social satire, mock mock memoir, you know, psychological thriller, supernatural horror, alternative history, comedy of manners, satire of just like I don't know, certain kinds of overachieving parents, and who over medicate their children, and are just so fanatical about, but it's a very status oriented thing. They're fanatical about looking like they're good parents, and like they're fanatical about nutrition and things like that. They would never just let their kids, just like have a hamburger for supper. I mean, they would just think, oh no, no, they would look down on people who do that. But they're not good people. They're not doing it for the right reasons, and it's all rather foolish and misguided. And there's also this event there's also this thing happening where young boys are disappearing. And this is a very interesting aspect to the story, because it's like amidst all this terrorism and amidst all this supernatural mayhem, you know, you have boys just and it's all boys, just vanishing, and their bodies don't turn up, and we never hear from their abductors, asking for ransom money. It's like they're just disappearing, and so that becomes a flashpoint in the story. That becomes something where we don't know the extent to which Bret's own son, who's 11 years old and who's this disaffected youth, he seems to be possibly to know more about this whole phenomenon of disappearing boys than one would think that he would, and so that heightens the sense of tension and the sense of suspense, because we're worried about the relationship, of course, between the father and son, but also, is the son going to just disappear? Is he going to become one of these lost boys, as they're later called? So all this stuff is going on, and it makes for a very suspenseful read, and entertaining and funny and bewildering, and all these things. But then I think the big, again, let me emphasize this, the biggest coup of the whole book is that, after this story that is really intense and exhausting, and rips your heart out. It's just, with all the twists and turns and all the suspense, and wondering how everything fits together, and this whole postmodern kind of conceit where the author becomes the creator, and like, when does fiction become real? The blurred lines between fiction and reality, and all this kind of heady sort of stuff. Again, to have it end on this note where you're moved almost to tears, or I was, by where it goes, by specifically with the father and son, this tumultuous relationship, and it takes many twists and turns, and I'm not going to give anything away, but there's this extraordinary final scene. There's this extraordinary scene where the father and the son meet many years later, and I'm not going to go into why what makes this scene so incredible, and what makes it so moving and so powerful, because I don't want to spoil the plot. I was fine with spoiling The Exorcist Believer, because that movie's just crap. It deserves to be spoiled. This book does not deserve to be spoiled. It should be read, so that you can enjoy these twists and turns. But to have it end in this way, where I never really thought that Bret Easton Ellis was this what's the word for it? Humanitarian, not humanitarian. Not like this sort of humanist, or I don't know, someone who an author of genuine goodwill, right? who sees how family, even though family, in the book doesn't exactly work. It almost works, but it doesn't. But still, that family can redeem so much, and that there's this incredible vision of forgiveness. That you can go from hating your father, despising your father, to seeing what it was like from his perspective, and then developing this compassion, not only forgiveness but compassion for him. And again, just this incredibly powerful, moving sort of ending that you just would never have thought. That, I guess, again, I want to emphasize, from the way this book starts, you would never have thought it would take you in that direction. It is just incredible. It is an amazing book. So those are my thoughts on Lunar Park by Bret Easton Ellis. Not his most famous book. Not maybe one that you're less, certainly one you're less likely to have heard of than American Psycho or Less Than Zero. Maybe way down there, because again, it was of the books that were available of his, this was the least expensive. So that's that's saying maybe it's that shows that maybe it's far from being his most popular one. Maybe even close to his least popular. I don't know. I don't have access to his book sales, but to me, it's an incredible book, well worth reading. So thanks for watching. This ended up being kind of long, anyway, but I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for sticking with it to the end. And I hope you read Lunar Park by Bret Easton Ellis, because it's definitely worth your time.